Hello. Welcome to the Sermon Podcast for the Community Church for GOD. All right. This is going to be great. I'm pumped. My name is Mitchell. I'm on the pastoral care team for our church. I am joined today by Matthew Parker.
Hello.
He is also on the pastoral care team. He's a fantastic friend and speaker and speaks quite often. And Ben Reese as well.
Hey.
Ben Reese is on staff with the Institute for Global Outreach Developments and is a great teacher, speaker. Every time he speaks in church, we're all blessed. We push for him to speak more.
Hebrew scholar, I think, can be thrown out there.
Yeah, why not?
I don't know what age scholar. I don't know if there's a timeline there, but I feel good about it.
Yeah, I feel pretty scholarly.
You scholar at it.
Scholar.
Don't get lost on scholar.
No, I was going to say it's a better sliding scale with age than like sage.
Sage feels different.
That has to be older.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to be a little bit more wrinkly.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you are taking mantle of the scholar.
Sure,
That's
why
great.
not,
Yeah.
I mean, why not? As if you aren't one, then that would just be bad. But I feel like we're in a good spot here. This is great. If you haven't joined to listen before, this is a chance where we can chat through sermons that we give at church to give them more time to expound, to really have some practical conversations where we as a church can really talk through the word, because if we just hear it on Sunday, leave it there, we're missing so much of how God's word can sink into our hearts and live out through our lives.
Amen.
Thank you. I'm preaching already, guys.
Yeah, let's go.
I didn't even go this round. But the sermons that we're talking about today are on hospitality. They are with these two gentlemen, and they both gave a sermon on a couple different texts. So if we could have Parker just give the text you spoke on and then some of your main takeaways.
Yeah.
We'll do that with Ben, and then we'll just chat it up.
Yeah, so my text was Acts 2:42 through 47. And I won't read it, but essentially it gives like a window into the communal experience of this like first century church and how they were operating as a community. Devoting themselves to teaching is an emphasis. Attending temple together comes up later. So biblical education together is something that's important. Something else that's emphasized a couple times in the passage is breaking bread together. I like how verse 46 says, and day by day attending temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they receive food with glad and generous hearts. And it gives like a picture into this communal experience where people are learning the word together, but the learning the word is going to then promote or encourage spending time together in your home. And I think something I tried to emphasize in my sermon is that, your house is a private space. So when you let people into it, there's some vulnerability there, and how you talk to your spouse or your roommate, how you interact with kids, how you interact with how you organize your space, if it's clean, whatever. It's like everybody gets a window, and it's a healthy experience for believers to be able to see one another in that way. And then have what I like how the text emphasizes, these glad, generous emotions that should take place. I think it's easy to be invited over to somebody's house, or to maybe invite somebody over to your house and feel like it's a burden, or you're getting in an argument with the person that you're prepping the meal with, or you feel like the meal's not enough, or something breaks whatever, the stresses of life. But the text is really trying to help us see there's something important to that glad, generous kind of atmosphere that should take place.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the text, it talks about like this economy that they were even producing in the midst. So they're like working together, they're learning the word together, they're eating together. And when you do that with people, you're definitely going to get to know one another. And I think start to get at the core of what fellowship is outside of maybe a once a month gathering where you're fellowshipping. But man, you're really getting to know each other and getting into people's lives.
Yeah. I mean, your sermon, you brought up like fighting with your spouse, or like we all have dirty bathrooms. Is there a problem here? Like, can we all admit our dumps get a little messy sometimes? Like,
well, I think
you
one
didn't
time,
say it,
yeah, I didn't say that. And I wouldn't have said it, as a matter of fact. So, but you did.
But you did.
I think that one time I mentioned that if I go into a guest bathroom at somebody's home, I might wipe it down. You know, like if the toilet seats, you know, the kids have gone crazy on it
Right.
or whatever. So now though, I just thought I was doing somebody a solid. Like,
Right.
I don't know, I was a custodian.
Leaving it better than you found it.
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
But now, like when I show up to people's homes, I get a lot of, sorry about my bathroom. Don't look at my kitchen. I'm like, that kind of stresses me out because I'm not here to judge. Definitely not.
And even the text, I think it kind of plays into that where you're fellowshipping and like breaking bread, where it's not like you don't get any of the stresses of hosting someone in this text. It's like, hey, it's the matter of like just coming together in your homes. And it's like, for me, I felt even more just connected with people on a human experience. If you witness an argument between another husband and spouse and it resolves well, and it's like, hey, they're not trying to like keep everything so buttoned down that it's like, this seems like a false narrative that like a Stepford Wives situation where it's like, oh, are we just like putting up tons of fronts that this all looks perfect? And it's like, when somebody has an argument and it's like, oh, this is real life. Like, hey, these are friends, you know, and it's like, there's a comfortability there where it's like, oh, well, then I can be as honest as I want to be because you just had a fight here, you know, or things like that. Yeah. Me and Braden don't stage fights when we host people over to give that comfortability. But I think I relate to so much of what you're saying. We host quite a bit. I've like shared, I think 90% of our arguments are about food and hosting, where like Bryn, we're hosting people over and she's like making the food. And I'm deeming that it's not enough. So I'm like heating stuff up in the background. We had like one where we hosted Ashley and Nick, and then like that situation happened. She's mad at me. We're like arguing on our porch, and Ashley's like, hey guys, I think the food is ready. Like all the timers went off, and we're like outside arguing.
Yeah, because I think too that the glad and generous kind of environment that you want to create, it's definitely not a false one, and it's not one that's like fakely happy. That's not what the text I think is saying either. That's why I think something I brought up in my sermon is that breaking bread, you know, even though the text says they break bread, now there's like the reality that you have to prepare the bread, the space, the table. And then I talked about how different people I've worked with even in ministry through the years, like Greg or Jen, are going to be on the side of like high preparation and intentionality, whereas like the culture I came from, it was like, who cares, eat on a paper towel in the hallway. But just because that's a culture I come from doesn't mean that's the right one. Right. And so there's a reality that even the intention that you put into preparing and making your space something where people can come into it and enjoy it, there's something powerful there to that fellowship. Yeah. And you really emphasize it matters. Like when someone hosts you, it is a labor of love. Like, you know, as my family's gotten bigger, you have like a bigger family. It's not as easy for someone to be like, hey, we'll like tag you on, like come on over. Like if somebody invites us over, it's like, okay, they changed most of their day to make this happen. And there should be so much love that we like feel in that. And like just how this text is brought up, like this is how communities can grow and even like lift one another up in, you know, an encouraging way that it's like, hey, we're sharing this together. Right. And like we've considered you in so many aspects, cleaning, prepping, cleaning after. I think it was great. Is there anything that you picked this passage specifically? Are you more connected with like hosting or hospitality in this way? I know that wasn't your culture growing up of like meals weren't important, but you feel that is this more on your mind, I think, even now than previously? Or is it still like, unless Greg or Jen points it out, you're still like, hey. No, I've
Parker
I've grown.
meal, Parker.
No. I've grown. I think that, well, I chose this passage because we were having banqueting table the Sunday that I preached. So I wanted to talk about table fellowship in particular. Actually, I was reflecting on this before I came over here, and I was thinking about how some years ago, Nifa and I used to kind of strategize, like, who haven't we spent time with, who haven't we seen, and have those people over. And in the past, probably like 2 years, I don't know if like we've put that kind of effort into it. And I was actually just thinking to myself, like, I wasn't like convicting myself, but I was just like, man, like, I want to make sure I don't lose that. Because, you know, like with the speed of life and with busyness, it's very easy to let this thing go unless somebody else does it for you. And I think that's why people can feel left out, because there are people putting in the effort to have these times with their friends or their family. And then you can see that on social media, or you can maybe you hear about it in a conversation at work, and now you're like, man, I wish I could have those experiences. And my encouragement to people is like, if you want to have those, you should create them.
Right.
And typically the people who are creating them are having them the most. Even they're the ones getting invited over to other places.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's with social media, whether it's like FOMO nature or just like jealousy cranked up to, like every knob is cranked up where that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Basically at all times that aspect itself of like, oh, someone else is fellowshipping or doing this thing. It's so quick to either be jealous or judge of like, how much did that cost, or how did you have time to do that? Because I know you were late on, blah, blah, blah. And I think it turns into everything this text is not about, right?
Yeah, that's where the glad and generous part comes in, because you can't create that environment if you're also like judging or, being overly critical of people that you want to have over.
Yeah.
And I do think it does take intentionality and work. But also, with that passage, that's how community is done. And if you share the burden of that, you can actually reduce your work or create more like efficiency. Like, I think, that generousness where you're like, oh, I didn't have to cook a meal today. This is really wonderful. And if I reciprocate that to you, and there's a sharing in the burden of life, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I think,
I mean, even something simple like, I brought this up in my sermon, but like I'll be washing dishes after you've come over for dinner, but then you'll be on the couch with the kids going over spelling, editing, writing assignments.
Yeah.
And and we didn't plan that. I wasn't like, hey, Ben,
right.
You know how much I spent on this meal. If I divided it out, you'd owe me X. So now it's not, there's a generosity to it. I give, you give. And I think if we can approach one another like that, especially when we are together, like, what can I give in this moment? Maybe I brought cups and plates, or I brought, 2 liters of soda, but what can I give? Like, if we're generous in those moments, I think that the friendship and the conversation we have is going to end up being just much more meaningful.
Yeah, it's a natural way to network. And like, if you're over and it's like, my dishwasher isn't working, you're like, oh, I take a look at it. It's like that kind of natural exchange of and practical skills, but also perspectives. Like, hey, what do you think about this? And so it's like, there's a huge cost to it in terms of like planning, but also there's just such a large benefit to it, which I think that the generousness and the joy, I like that you captured within your sermon, that this shouldn't be like all right, let's try to find the 3 times that we can have people over this month. And, I think it's okay. It can really enhance your life,
It's okay if it feels like that, but at the same time, like, then move forward, like move through that. Like, you're tired, you're frustrated with whatever, but then, all right, that's okay. Move through it, and get to the part where you're excited to give.
Yeah, I'm rarely like pumped about fellowship, going into times of fellowship. But it's like the same thing with like going to the movies with me. Like, I never want to go to the movies, but then when I'm there in the seat and the screen's coming on, I'm like, this is awesome. Like, I'm so excited about this. Like, I get to watch a movie. This is cool. But for some reason, like, projecting going to a movie, I'm like, oh, why would we do that? That sounds awful. That's got like.
It's a good example.
When you're planning it out, you're just thinking about the cost, because it's hard to conceptualize the benefit. It's easy to conceptualize, I gotta, make food, I gotta put out seats or whatever it is, I gotta clean my house. So my encouragement to people out there would be just like, jump in and make it happen, and you'll find the blessing on the other side of that, even if thinking about having people over, it might be daunting. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you just gave me, I had a memory I hadn't thought about in a while, but the Keggies, Cameron and Lori used to invite Nifa and I over for dinner all the time. Lori's a great cook, great baker. Cameron is a great picky eating consumer. Like, he has a lot of perspectives on food because he grew up with a great cook. His mom was a great cook, so...
I'll give a giant compliment to Lori. You know what Cameron's good at? Giving complaints.
And making coffee. He's good at making coffee.
That's true.
But I remember that, Lori would like do all this and Neef and I wouldn't do much for the meal, but then I would definitely always wash the dishes.
Right.
Like I like insisted on it. Even when she's like, no, don't. And I wasn't like annoying about it, like a meaningful conversation's happening and I'm like the butt in the, the kitchen clanging pans and
The
making a
disposal.
deal about it. Yeah. But there's a lot that can happen in a small moment, and we just have to be sensitive to one another. And that's what this fellowship is really going to produce, is that when we do spend the time together, learning together, working together, eating together, it's going to produce these really real moments where we can give to one another, bless one another in ways that we need, because we all need this. Like, life is hard, and we need one another in this way.
And I think something both of you all sharing, and in the text you're saying like working together, living together, eating together, that there are natural times that we all have. Like we all go to work, we all eat a meal. Mm-hmm. And like really that doing them together and with some intentionality, it's not because this doesn't take on a competitive nature where it's like, okay, who's going to be the best host, cook the grandest meals and have like the finest things. Like it should really just like spark in our whole community or with one another of like, hey, they're taking time to think about me. How can I like take time to think about others? Like Ben is saying he's not going to be the cook, but like helping with homework or whatever. And that if this did become like a cultural competition of like, okay, this is valued of like table fellowship, I've got to like scheme a way to do the best possible. But it's like, even people who love to host, it's not a matter of like, there shouldn't be any competitive element. It's like, this should be a spark of like, hey, I don't give in this way. Like Bryn would never be a baker. She would grade all day long. Like, I'll help you grade. Like we were chatting with Kevin, our brother-in-law, works at another Christian school in Nashville. We were together and she's like, hey, if you need help grading, I grade quite a bit. She's like, I don't know if that's against the rules at your school, but like, I can help you grade. And he was like, kind of like laughed like, oh, I'm sure. And I was like, 100% she will do that because she cares about you. And it's like, that's the way that my wife sparks in other people. Like she'll just sweep in and grade a bunch of stuff. And it's like, I would not do that. I would rather cook a meal and hang out. But everyone has their giftings. Everyone has that way where, and this could be like the most, direct and like feasible spark to get people in that mode of service where it's like it's something you're going to do no matter what. You're working no matter what. How is your coworker serving you where it like sparks in your heart, hey, I need to like look out for others. I think that's something cool about it. It's just in the everyday things that we're doing, how do we approach it in a way that is spiritual? And like
at the end of this passage it says, and the Lord added to their number day by day those who are being saved. And I think that's like a reality of the community that's going to put in this effort. That's what's going to market the excitement people are going to have to participate, because they're going to see people with good friendships. And I think that, you watch a TV show or a movie and they need to develop a storyline about people being friends. It's going to include these elements: working together, eating together, learning together, whether it's college, Bible school, whatever. And there's something really beautiful to that. And it's cool that is what would contribute to people wanting to participate in your ministry or your life, is when they can see you having those kind of interactions.
Yeah, for sure. And then we'll come back or just touch base before we get too far in. I want Ben to introduce his passage and kind of the main thrust he had, because Parker's was a lot about like the action of like table fellowship and being together. I think Ben had a different passage and a different kind of take altogether on another aspect of hospitality.
Yeah, my passage was 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 through 10. And I began by talking about how fellowship is something that we can have insecurities about. Like we can wonder, do I belong? Do people really want me along? Do I even like fit in whatever place we're in? And 1 John is written to kind of console some of those anxieties, and how the author consoles them as he provides them a rubric by which they can identify, hey, I really do belong in this fellowship that God has placed me in. And so there was 2 criteria: 1, walking in the light, and 2, confessing your sins. And so I kind of explained how those 2 work. Walking in the light has to do with being clear about what we're doing and articulating, hey, this is what I'm about. Saying, hey, making it known to people, like I'm here because I love Jesus and I want to serve him, and that's what I'm about. And if you can be clear about your purpose and you don't have like mixed motives,
Right.
then you can be assured that you're going to be accepted. Now, the other reason why people have insecurities is because of as human beings, we all have faults and failings, and we can look at those things and be like, man, if they didn't know, if they knew
Right.
that I have these thoughts or I struggle with this. And so John just gets that out of the way and says, and you have to confess your sins, like, make that known to people. Be like, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I'm going through this, or I'm learning this. God's trying to help me with this. And through those conversations, you'll find the acceptance that God has. And you'll be strengthened in your fellowship through that. And I think many people have that experience, that they have this fear that, like, man, if they knew about this, but then they make that known to people, say, hey, pray for me, I need help with this. They find the love and the mercy on the other side of that, and it strengthens their fellowship where they thought it would be a weakening factor in feeling a part of something. It actually is the way that we can feel a part.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the dramatic, dramatic things like I've been hiding
Weeping.
this for years, and it can be small things like I really have a temper issue and I need you to keep
Can't
me
relate to
accountable
that.
to that.
Well, yeah, because it's easy to feel like even when you are struggling with something and then you're around people
Right.
and then you just maybe you think you're interpreting they're not struggling. So
Right.
now you already feel like an outsider. And it's interesting how living in the darkness, even as you were defining it, would be like to not communicate clearly where you're at. There would be a disintegration
Right.
into just feeling disconnected. Whereas if you do the opposite, which is hard, is you have to actually, somebody asks you, hey, how are you doing? You don't have to be like unload, but you can also be like not great.
Right.
And now if that
Yeah.
person has time, they'll follow up, hopefully.
Yeah.
Really? I have a couple minutes, man. Do you want to talk? Can I pray for you?
Right.
Like, that can be really like, even what you were saying about thinking about going to the movies versus being there, like
Right.
thinking about having that conversation versus having it.
Having it's going to be a way
Because
different
when you have
experience.
it, you're going to feel a release, and
Right.
it's going to be helpful.
And as long as you are, if you do it in a faith-filled way, that's the key. Like you want to be like, hey, I want to serve Jesus and I want to do what's right. I am struggling with this. Please help me. And I know God on the other end of this is going to help me. But if you go in like just being faithless, then that becomes a problem because then they have to restore you to faith.
Right.
Like
If you're just resigned over to your failings. or
right.
your
If you're just like,
failures.
I'll never make it. God's, has left me to the side, and you're just like, you're being honest in that way. That's not helpful. That's just now people are going to be like, dude, are you on the way out? Are you leaving? Like, what is like,
Yeah.
and then they have to kind of restore you like, hey, do you even want to,
Right.
serve God? And that's not a good place to be in. But,
Right.
If you get there, that probably means that you have ignored opportunity
right.
to share and be in the light for a long time.
For a long time. Yeah. And that-
And there's a reality that disintegration can lead to that. But hopefully, via this active fellowship we want to practice, we can help each other maintain, because life's hard, you know, and we need one another. So it's like, I like how you were defining walking in the light and confessing. You didn't talk about confessing sins. How did you nuance that in your sermon in relation to fellowship?
I think within the sermon, it was in relation to having vulnerable conversations about where you're struggling.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because part of walking in the light, obviously the walking metaphor, has to do with the fact that in being clear about our desire to serve Jesus, part of that is the educational endeavor of learning to work out his word or live out his word. And as human beings, we're always going to have it. We're going to have areas where we're failing in that. And so part of even making it clear that, hey, I'm on the trajectory, I'm on the Jesus trajectory, is by sharing with people what God is teaching you, where he's trying to grow you, what you're struggling with. And those kinds of conversations should actually be adhesive for our fellowship, not disintegrative. Like,
Yeah.
it's things get weird when nobody is having those conversations and everybody's just pretending like, oh, everything's,
Yep.
we're all okay,
Yeah, or everyone's busy. So it's like there's not an opportunity to, it's like we can all, I think, just be glazed over with like our tasks or our things to do, that there's not those interactive moments to like be confronted, where it's like you're having a moment with a friend. It's like, no, really, how are you doing? It's like you can busy ourselves so much that we don't even have those moments. And it's just like, we're talking soccer at the kids' soccer games. We're talking, work when we're at work. We're talking about, the weather, just like kind of like nominal topics in a way that we're never really getting into, like, hey, what is your, spiritual, emotional being like at this moment?
Yeah. And it should be noted that busyness is sometimes a reality, and sometimes it's a psychological defense that we put up to actually figuring out what's going on inside of us. Like if I can just keep busy enough, I never have to figure out what's happening in my soul.
Yeah.
But you can observe in yourself if at the end of the day, and you have that opportunity to go to prayer, and you do have time, but you're like, oh, no, and you just keep yourself busy with maybe like social media or something. Because there's something that's keeping you from wanting to like investigate what's happening within you. And that's a real hindrance to having that clarity of purpose that First John is wanting us to have. Because it is during those times of prayer where we make those declarations of faith to say, hey, this morning or tonight, Jesus, I want to serve you. You're my Lord. I'm going to be about that today. And oftentimes I think we use busyness as a way to sort of shirk off that responsibility. I know that's a struggle that I have. Like, well,
because it feels validating to say it, because people are like, oh, you're busy, no problem.
Yeah.
It's a valid excuse. Whereas like I was sitting on my couch scrolling Instagram, people are like, what? But if I was like, sorry, I was busy on my lunch break, then people are like, oh, nice.
Yeah. And like, I really think I don't know. I'm just going off on this topic of the busyness because I feel like it is one of those things that I think, like, if we're busy with just like meaningless things, then we need to change that.
Right.
Like, it's like somebody says, I don't have any money, but they're spending all of their money on, just like trinkets or whatever,
Fireworks.
Bobblehead dolls or whatever,
Whoa, hey.
Stuff from Temu.
I got the first 20 of those for free, okay? Everyone I've invested in after that.
Yeah. Now, if your life is like busy with good things, then you have a different language. Like, my life is really rich right now. I'm getting to do like these wonderful things.
Yeah.
But I do think that like sometimes busyness gets bandied about as an excuse, but I think there's always further questions that need to be asked. I think if your friend's like, have you been praying? It's like, I've been real busy. I haven't. I don't think that we should just be like, oh, well, I mean, they're busy, so that makes sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Very much so.
We're like, I haven't had fellowship with anyone. I haven't hung out with any friends in the last month. It's like, oh, why not? I'm just real busy. It's like, I mean, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Let's investigate this a little bit,
Which it feels, I know all of us have kind of been in this church community for a while, decade plus. I don't do numbers, but 15 years.
Yeah, we're
where it feels that we can at least convince ourselves that we're so secure. Like you're saying, like a declaration of purpose and like being in the light where it's like, hey, I'm here to serve the least of these. I'm here because I want to follow the Lord with all that I have. That if you've been here long enough that you can kind of like papers over what your day-to-day is like. Right. Where it's like, we are just kind of like easing into like, well, I am busy. I do have these logistics and I feel a sense of belonging because I have this long standing, like even verbal and out for everyone to see like, hey, this is why I'm here. But like, we could just be, you didn't say decaying, but did you say
disintegrating?
Like, disintegrating. Yeah. Like from the inside of like, hey, I'm not as tethered to this identity as I was 15 years ago, 5 months ago, whatever the time frame is, that like it just erodes without us even being aware of it until it's almost like, hey, I'm not even having feeling in worship anymore. Or like, hey, I can't remember the last time I prayed. And it's like, that's, you're kind of like the point of no return. You're like seeing the signs. You're like, whoa, what's happening to like my spirituality? I felt that way in the past, and I think it can easily come, and it's like you don't realize it until you're like, in that moment of somewhat crisis.
It's kind of wild that fellowship would have an aspect of needing to confess sins, because confession of sins is so raw. I mean, it's not something you would think, hey, admitting my faults, my errors, my missteps, my mistakes. Man, there's, sin has such a broad definition, but to be able to talk about like where you failed or where you screwed up, or like, hey, I made this mistake at work and it caused people a bunch of stress. Like, you might be carrying that, but you don't want to talk about it because you're thinking, well, talking about that, how is that going to impact my fellowship experience? But what the text is saying is that it's a necessary component, right, to being able to enjoy the table.
And in fact, the text goes on to say that if you say that you're without sin, then you're a liar. And and I tried to highlight where I think that means that if you try to pretend like you have everything together, you're going to end up having to worry about your appearances in such a way that you project that, but it's going to be ultimately an untruthful picture of who you are. Like, you're going to start lying, like, yeah, everything's great. Yep. I love this. I'm very happy. And maybe like you put up this false image of yourself. And that's a burden that is very hard for us humans to maintain, is that perception that people have of us, or that we try to project to others, that is ultimately hollow.
Yeah.
Very much.
I think it puts us at a place where we should, like I said, our sense of belonging is like kind of personal, like, do I feel like I belong or not? Mm-hmm. I think when we are kind of hollowed out in that way, where it becomes harder to gauge that on both sides, where it's like it's hard for us to feel that we belong when we are either living a lie, or like, hey, we know that we have this duality where it's like, I'm not, embodying this belonging, right? This vocation that we all share, that we're all committed to together. I feel like I don't even belong talking to Parker about my prayer life when I know I haven't prayed in forever, or there's those things where it's like, now I don't belong. And then it works the other way where I can't even contribute. Right. So it's like, Ben comes, like you were saying in your sermon, like, go up to people and say like, hey, here's what I want God to do in my life, or what God is doing in my life, and like pray with me about that. It's like, if I have that duality and I am hollowed out, it's like, I can't invest into that. It's kind of like you're talking to an empty actor. Like, I can't put forward what you need, right, to engage and to have that moment where we're built up and like we share that fellowship together. It's like a really interesting way where I heard a podcast recently. It's like the difference between kids and adults, where like, if you're a kid who's like in 6th grade and it's like, I'm going to be like the tough kid, you can like see the way they dress. It's easy to like put the picture out for a kid of like, this is who I want to be. Mm-hmm. And you can easily discern like, well, that's just not who you are. It's like, you're not that kid. You're a nice kid, or whatever the thing they're going for. Like, I'm the athlete, and it's like, Mitchell, you're 4'8". Like, that's not who you are. Like, we can kind of tell. Yeah. And then as we get older, I think we either get more adept at doing that, or it becomes like survival instinct, where it's like, I can't let people see that I'm not the friendly guy who's laughing at everything and is like, is carefree, of like, if I'm built up with worry, but like, it becomes a house of cards that we can't let fall if we don't have that practice more consistently of, hey, breaking that down, of admitting our sins, with one another. And it's like, that can be such a breath of air that we should be taking. And it's like, you can get in those spots where you're just, how long can I hold my breath? Because it can't be that much longer. And then it'll just come out in the worst way, at the worst time. And it's like, that's not what the Lord wants. Well, if we're at breathing in and out, for having those moments to admit our sin and to proclaim the hopes, to proclaim like this identity that we want to have, it's like, it's way easier to relate to each other and know how people relate to us.
Yeah, I think even in the season we're in, like, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, like, there's going to be probably an uptick in opportunity to fellowship, whether it's like a dinner that you can invite people over, or there's like some holiday forced meal like Thanksgiving, where people are just going to do that per
A
culture.
forced meal.
Well, it's like you feel like you should be somewhere eating with people.
Right.
But don't just like participate in the act, but try to present yourself in a generous way and give to others by asking them like, how are you doing? Or, hey man, I remember you telling me about this. We haven't talked about it in a while. How's that going? Or, and hopefully that will produce like some healing in all of us that can have those kind of experiences that we can come away from it and be like, man, I'm so thankful I had that opportunity. I got to share. I'm in the light. You don't feel like you're pretending maybe as you were. And I always get sad, in social media when people talk about Thanksgiving in particular, it's like going home and the burden of eating with people you don't agree with, whether it's like political ideology or, cultural perspective. And man, if you can like break through all of that and just have a moment where you're going to love the person across the table from you, regardless of where they're coming from, and they can reciprocate that's where like some really beautiful activity can take place that God wants us to be able to experience. I really like your passage, Ben, even in contrast, not in contrast, but, in conjunction, connected to the passage I preached out of, because mine kind of has this like vibrant communal, like you can hear the community kind of in the background, the hustle and bustle, and then yours is kind of like the thought process behind what's really taking place inside the soul of each person, and the need we have for one another to be open with one another, and just to be honest, because there's a lot of people out there who are going to point their criticisms from their house or their position. They're going to be like, I don't like these people, I don't like this thing. But they're also not people who are inviting people into their home and then having these like really wonderful moments of vulnerability. Yeah. So it's like if you find yourself in that position, just stop and invite people in. Yeah. And hopefully, even in this season that we're in, people can experience some really wonderful times that don't just feel like, oh, we only did that because it's culturally mandated, but you did it and you made it meaningful.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a question I had, which I think touches on quite a bit of stuff that we've already mentioned, is that when you brought up social media a number of times, I feel like people in our community have typically used it as like, they'll have the close friends, they'll like debrief, kind of like, hey, here's a quote that I'm thinking about, or here's like kind of my thoughts, or just like happenings. We're here, we're there, here's my kids. I think workplace should be a venue where we could have, I think, more of these conversations of like, hey, this, like, I could use some help, or I'm struggling, not just a prayer request for a health related issue, but it's like being more vulnerable. I think it's just not a great construct. If there's announcements, there's different feeds, it doesn't alert people well. It's like, I think ideally we would have a venue for that. And I think our busyness comes to a place where it's like, are people having this discussion as often as they should? Like, our accountability group should be like a safety net for, it's like, hey, this is a moment you're having each month where you can at least have a checkpoint with people. But like, do you all feel like we have a venue to, I think, provoke people or to address people like, hey, like, what is your fellowship like? Or having a vulnerability available to your fellowship?
Are you saying there needs to be like a digital platform for that?
I'm just getting your all's thoughts, because I think, again, workplace, I think, should be a safe place where we could utilize this more, where if I'm busy, or it's like, hey, just through circumstances of life, I haven't been able to have an outlet for this, but like, I know this is on my heart and it would be helpful to share it. I think a digital outlet or a platform like that would be helpful. But like, do you all think we need to work on more venues as a community where it's like we could meet this need? Or is this like, hey, if you don't have the eyes to see the benefit it is to fellowship with one another, and you're not like trying to, go for it and like, hey, I need to make this a priority, then it's just like, it's not going to happen. Because I feel somewhat of both, where it's like, if someone says like, hey, I just haven't had the chance to be with somebody, I'm like, seek someone out, like, hey, shout out your voice and like make it known of like, I want to like have a moment with somebody. At the same time, I think maybe the couple natural venues that we might have, which would be meeting together at church or with workplace, it's just with the programming or how things are working, it doesn't seem like there's a great venue for, kind of just debriefing or having like that vulnerable fellowship. And like I said, I think church accountability groups, if those are meeting together, that is like the venue of the church of like, hey, you're not going to like raise your hand, come up on stage and saying, here's where I'm most vulnerable. Like, but in that accountability group, we should be having those moments together.
Right. I think in terms of the First John passage, it says walking in the light. And I do think walking, there's a sense within that verb of taking ownership. Like you're walking, you're making a decision to do this. And so I think it should be emphasized that people should get to a place where they are taking initiative on creating their own venues for these kinds of conversations to take place. Mm-hmm. Like you can't always be the person that waits around for the organization to mandate a certain venue for that to happen. That's my first kind of like thought. My second thought is that, however, people do need tutored into these kinds of relationships. And for some people, they need that extra help to get things started, especially for people who are new, who it's very awkward when you're somebody that's new, that's going to take initiative to be like, hey, I don't know you, but can I come over for dinner? You know, that doesn't generally happen. So I do think that, of course, we need to be sensitive to, I think accountability groups are a good start. But I think also just empowering our people to be sensitive to, hey, you know, you've known everybody for 10 years, but make sure that you're taking initiative with these other people as well. So I don't know. Digital formats, I'm more skeptical about.
Yeah, same. I feel the same way.
I think that for me, digital formats are good for disseminating information to get everybody on the same page. Like, let's say that I'm having like a family, like, you know, somebody's family member passes away. I think it's a great place to say, hey, this happened, so that everybody knows my situation, to disseminate information. But I don't think that any actual fellowship can happen on a digital platform.
Wow.
I don't know. That's just my hot take.
Because I think,
you go ahead.
Yeah. We already know what you think. No, because
Chris, go ahead and cut his mic out altogether.
Yeah.
No, because I think workplace. I mean, I've shared vulnerable stuff on workplace many times over the years, or whatever social walk, social cast, whatever they were called, path. You know, we've had so many. And I do think it has its place, like what Ben said. Like, there's an opportunity to share, like, broad news. And even, like, there's certain groups there where you might want to share something. Like, I think I've shared a couple of testimonies, like, on the Academy parent feed, because it was something I wanted. It was appropriate for Academy parents. I think, like, in context even to my passage in Acts 2, like, breaking bread requires, like, physical interaction.
For sure.
And I think in our community in particular, like whether you're if you're an academy student, you know, there's so much regimented for you throughout the day in regards to your social environment and your fellowship. Like those kids are getting it Monday through Friday. And then obviously they have field trips. They, you know, middle school and high school have different retreats and mission trips. So that's all there. And then institute students, I mean, at some seasons, I feel like there's an event like every weekend. For them to be able to hang out and to connect and get to know their professors. I think then as you get into like post-institute adulthood, you know, whether it's neighborhood Bible study, it's accountability groups, it's an institute class you want to take on the side, it's where you work. If you do have the opportunity to work with other people within our community, that becomes a really awesome opportunity. And then there becomes the reality where you can invite people into your space or your moment and go get coffee or whatever. So I think there is opportunity. I think that if you're in a position where you have to make it happen, it makes it a little more special. And I think there's a little more reward on the other side of it versus when it's curated for you. And I think people need to feel that pressure. I think people need to feel the pressure of engaging in the opportunities that exist. Not to say the opportunities that exist are perfect and that we never need any other ones. I'm not saying that. I mean, I remember when you were pushing for men's tailgating, or maybe it was men's or women's tailgating before church,
which he's done, and I really appreciate those venues. It's a
I've
wonderful
never
time
because I don't want it on Sunday morning.
You're missing out.
Definitely don't want anything. But there's a bunch of guys that show up, and ladies. I don't actually know. It's a men's thing. Okay,
so it's a guy's thing.
But you know that. But you saw that as like if somebody would have come to me and been like, "Hey, we need a pre-church event, I would have been like, don't pick me. I don't want to do that. But I think that's cool because that was something on your heart and it's like met a need. And I love that. And I think other people should feel the freedom to take that initiative like you did.
Right.
Because I think even when you brought it up initially, we were like, what? What do you want to do, Mitch? Sunday mornings? People want to do that? I'm sure you were kind of met with a little bit of resistance. Not that people were saying you can't do it. It's illegal. But you pushed through and you made it happen. I think other people taking those opportunities to do stuff like that it'll bless others. But you have to be sensitive to the Lord in those moments, which means you need to be praying, you need to be reading the word. Like that kind of stuff doesn't just happen all the time.
Right. Yeah, and I think I agree with both of you guys. I don't think we need, if we can only have the best digital venue where people could like be vulnerable, like that's going to be a far cry from being face to face, fellowshipping with one another in breaking bread or just walking in life together. But I think I'm just feeling that like if there's all the dangers or issues with social media or like where it plays into our worst aspects of human beings of like jealousy or desire or hatred of ourselves or whatever it can become. And I'm like, as we become increasingly digital and even the natural waves of like not just our busyness, but like we are running a spectrum from academy high school students through retirees where we are all on different time constraints or timelines. That is there a better way that we can at least have a digital platform that can engage or interact in a way that is uplifting, which Workplace is certainly available. I just think we're going to have to change sometime next year anyways, but it feels that it is
just closing down.
Yeah. They announced that they're cutting off support for it.
Dang.
So
Zuckerberg wants you to hang out in the metaverse.
We can all hang out in the metaverse, dude. Meet me in the
that's
metaverse.
It's VR. That's what you were. We can
VR
put
chat
on
rooms.
those ridiculous glasses and talk to one another. I mean, that's the future.
I think you all had great contributions to end of like that there is a personal responsibility that it means something for you to like take stock and like, hey, I need to engage this. I need to like pursue fellowship with one another. And then, I think Parker's last comment on it's not about people like having the proper venue or whatever. It's like, hey, if the Lord is like inspiring you, if this is something that it's like you're praying or it will meet a need for you, it will likely meet it for others. And like, if you want something to happen, like just, go ahead and do what you need to make it happen because there's certainly far less gatekeepers in our community or our church than are initially perceived, where it's like, hey, well, I didn't get this signed off on like the, X, Y, or Z. And it's like, well, if it's meeting a need and it's like the Lord is in it, like just vulnerably share that. And it's like, either someone will help you or if they don't understand it, like people didn't understand, why do you want to tailgate? Like Jen was like, how often do you tailgate? Do we need to set aside a budget? I was like, if it costs us too much, I was like, we'll do it by my car, but we'll do it because the parking lot exists, so I'm like, if it is something that you feel inspired to do and feel like it's going to, be a great time of fellowship with other people, like don't let budget stand in your way or like, hey, we're too busy. We can't get it on the calendar. Just start it and see if there's something in it that it's like this God's Spirit's going to be there. And it's like, it feels like very often there are either like waiting or critiquing of like, well, there's just not the right venue for this or like, oh, I wish this existed. It's like, hey, like throw a hand up, like send an email, like we'll make it happen. Or like you can have like the open highway of like, all right, just let's go. And we can do that because again, those are natural things God is working in all of our hearts of like Ben's book club, my tailgate, Parker's. I mean, you coaching cross country was a massive thing.
Dude, I love cross country.
And you brought more fellowship with the tent, like pre and post race, and even just your intensity than like I'm currently doing with my kids' basketball that I'm coaching.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you're a pace setter for me. I'm like, I need to be a better coach. But in all the ways that like we're just naturally, we like stepped into like, okay, I'm doing this because I feel like it's something that God wants me to do. It just like breaking bread or walking with someone, it's like a natural thing we're doing. Open yourselves up to the Lord. There's no telling where that will birth out of like a fellowship opportunity that is going to be
for sure.
Vulnerable with others and like bringing others in because as we learned through the cross country tent, there were some vulnerable moments this last year.
A lot of vulnerability.
It was great.
Beautiful.
Do you have anything else? I feel good about kind of, I just addressed the question I wanted to talk about.
No, I loved it. I loved thinking about Ben's passage and my passage together. And
Yeah.
I hope everybody can be encouraged to engage in some meaningful fellowship over this next season.
Amen.
Yeah, I feel good about it. Mitch, thanks for having me.
When are you hosting us? When are you cooking up a meal for everybody?
I gotta work on my house. It's not. You're actually the only person that has hung out with me at my house. So hey,
kudos.
Me and Santi were over there helping you with the bed frame.
Yeah. You've been in my house.
We weren't hanging out.
Yeah.
Church, this is what we're saying. We just need a balmy January day, and
Yeah.
Ben will host an outside event.
Right.
Yeah.
That we can all-
I gotta get some seating here.
Just steal the wood
Yeah.
from your neighbor next door. Those shards have all kinds of firewood piled up in that.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You're all invited.
This is fun. These two guys are great. As always, listen back to the sermons that are given. They're all on YouTube. They're all recorded with such professional quality and attention from our AV team. I re-listen to them every time we do this podcast. They give me more every time. So revisit any sermon that piques your interest. Listen to these and make sure they enter into our conversations, not just in our accountability groups. You're hanging out with friends. Bring up, hey, what does it look like to be vulnerable? Is our fellowship just over NBA basketball? Like, can we have some more meaning? Because I want to make my intentions known of why I'm here and what God's doing in my life. So leave a review, do all that good things to help our channel or help the podcast. But thanks so much for listening. We'll check you guys later.